Okay, this chapter is chapter 3 in the text, and it's going to cover carbon and then molecular diversity of life. And we're going to look at all the organic molecules made up of carbon that make up living things. So we all know that the majority of things on Earth, including living things, are made up of a bunch of water, right? We're basically made up of water. But aside from water, we're also made up of carbon-based compounds. We are organic beings because we have carbon as part of our makeup. So carbon is really, really important. It has the ability to make 4 covalent bonds, right? It has 4 unpaired electrons, and so it is large. It can form large molecules. It can become very, very complex when you get huge chains of carbons connecting together. So it's a really important molecule. And anything that contains carbon is said to be organic. When you guys are taking chemistry later on, you might take organic chemistry, and organic chemistry looks at just compounds that have carbon within its component. Now, like culturally, a lot of people think of organic as natural things, but in reality, organic, in the chemistry sense of it, in the scientific sense, organic is anything that's made up of carbon. We are going to learn within this chapter, not within this particular presentation, but we're going to learn within this chapter the 4 main classes of molecules that all living things have. So we're made up of carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. And a lot of that can make sense because we have to consume as part of our diet carbs, lipids, and proteins. The first 3 of these, so carbs, lipids, and proteins, can form huge molecules that are called macromolecules. Macro is big, so these are giant molecules. All of those 4 contain carbon. The first section within this chapter is concept 3.1. Carbon atoms can form diverse molecules by bonding with 4 other atoms. So the idea behind this section is to help you understand why carbon molecules are so important, because how they can be so diverse, how they can make these gigantic molecules. And it's all about the atom's electron configuration that leads into its diversity. So if you remember from the chemistry chapter, I think it was chapter 2, carbon has 4 valence electrons, 4 unpaired electrons. And so it can form 4 covalent bonds with a variety of any other atom that's out there. And this ability makes them very, very large. So if one carbon can form 4 covalent molecules, if 2 carbons are connected together, then you can now make it 6, and so on and so on. In molecules with multiple carbons, each carbon bonded to 4 other atoms has a tetrahedral shape. However, when the 2 carbon atoms are joined by a double bond, now they're on the same plane as the other carbons. So what I want you to know, like with this table, is just to understand that CH4, while you might see it in the molecular formulation, know what it looks like structurally, get an idea of the ball and stick figure, and then kind of that space filling model also. Electron configuration of carbon gives it covalent compatibility with many, many different elements. The valences of carbon and its most frequent partners, usually carbon is connecting with hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. And so these are the building codes that govern the architecture of living molecules. So most molecules within our body, the carbs, the lipids, the proteins, and the nucleic acids, are a carbon backbone, and off of that are hydrogens, oxygens, and mainly nitrogens. So if we just kind of compare carbon with 3 other molecules, you can see that hydrogen only has the ability to bond with 1 other element. So it's while it's an important element or an important molecule, it can't really do very much. Oxygen only has 2 valence electrons, and so it can only make 2 covalent bonds. Nitrogen has 3, it's a little bit better, but carbon has the max, and that's why carbon is so important and why it can be so incredibly diverse, because it has 4 times the ability of hydrogen to bond with other things and become other things. Carbon atoms can also partner with atoms other than hydrogen. So like carbon dioxide is CO2, they can bond with pretty much anything. It can also form covalent bonds to other carbon atoms, linking them into chains, making backbones, making these gigantic molecules. So here's carbon, this is CO2, carbon dioxide. Carbon di is 2, oxide, oxygen, so it's 2 oxygens compared to carbon, connected to carbon. And here you can see kind of a carbon backbone starting and all the hydrogens that are now linked to it. So those carbon chains, what you see right here is the very start of a very, very tiny carbon chain. They form the skeletons of most organic molecules. Carbon chains vary in length and shape. It all depends on if there's a double bond in something, it'll kink it off. It may be a straight line. It may be, it may look like a big hexagon. There's, it all kind of depends on a number of different things. So let's watch a video real quick that talks about carbon.
The carbon backbones of organic molecules may vary in length and in location of single and double bonds. Molecules may be straight or branched and may even contain rings of atoms.
So here you can see just different varieties of carbon skeletons. And here again are other varieties of carbon skeletons that you might see. Sometimes they'll even loop together and form rings. So all of these things are basically called hydrocarbons. They're carbons with hydrogen tails covalently bonded or linked to them. Hydrocarbons are organic molecules consisting of only carbon and hydrogen, as the name looks like it would mean, right? Many organic molecules, such as fats, have hydrocarbon components. So in the lipid group, they have these giant hydrocarbon tails. Hydrocarbons can undergo reactions that release a large amount of energy. Every time hydrogens are cut and broken off, energy can be released. And so that's why essentially lipids, when you consume lipids, while it stores itself as fat, it can release energy, large amounts of energy through slow release as it kind of burns off in your body. When we look at what carbohydrates look like, they're very simple a lot of times. And so when you need energy, you can take carbs and it spits out that energy, gives you that energy very quickly, whereas proteins and lipids, as we'll see, are bigger, more complex, and so the energy is larger within it. And if you aren't using it immediately, then it's going to get stored. Now, another term that you guys are going to have to know is this term called isomers. So an isomer, iso means the same. An isomer are compounds that have the same number of atoms of the same elements, but different structural properties. So it might have the same, like its ball and stick model will be different, but it will have the same, here we go, the same molecular formula, but its structural formula, ball and stick model and space filling model will look different. So structural isomers differ in the covalent arrangement of their atoms. It's just arranged a little bit differently, but it still has the same elements, the same molecules. The number of possible isomers increases as carbon skeletons increase in size. So here's an example of two structural isomers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 carbons in each one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 hydrogens. So it's C5H12 for both of them, but they're arranged differently. Structurally, they look different. There's also cis-trans isomers. So know that an isomer have the same, it's the same components of the element, just arranged differently. There's structural, there's cis-trans, and there's another one that we'll look at. Carbons have covalent bonds to the same atoms, but the atoms differ in their spatial arrangement due to the inflexibility of double bonds. The subtle differences in shape between such isomers can greatly affect the activities of organic molecules. So here is an example of a cis-trans isomer. It's a little bit structurally different, but whatever these two X's are, so cis isomer, the two X's, whatever this is, are on the same side, but in this example, they're on opposite sides. They're caticorning from one another. So because of the way that double bond is, maybe there's some negative or positive forces that are popping them off into caticorner directions as opposed to being right on the same side. So the same molecule, right? Same C2H2X2, but arranged differently. That's cis-trans. Enantiomers are isomers that are mirror images of one another, and so they differ in shape due to the presence of being asymmetric. Enantiomers are right-handed and left-handed versions of the same. So again, mirror images. Usually only one isomer is biologically active though. So, mirror images of one, the left, the L and the D. So isomers have enantiomers, cis-trans isomers, and structural isomers. Chemical groups can replace one or more of the hydrogens bonded to the carbon skeleton of a hydrocarbon. And these chemical groups we call functional groups. Functional groups are chemical groups that affect molecular function by being directly involved in chemical reactions. Each functional group participates in chemical reactions in a characteristic way. So there's a number of different functional groups. In this example, we have two totally different hormones that act totally different on the body, do different things to the brain and to the glands. The only difference in the two is this OH hydroxide right here, and just an oxygen on testosterone. So look at and also it has that CH3 coming off. So look at the things that are blocked in like kind of that light blue color. It has the same carbon compound, but these functional groups attached to the carbon in different ways make them two totally different molecules that do totally different things. You would never take estradiol if you needed testosterone treatment. So we have 7 functional groups that are most important to the chemistry of life. This is not organic chemistry. I don't care. I don't need you to know what all 7 of these functional groups are. Now, when you take the dynamic study module, or there might be something in a homework question where that's included. I'm not going to ask you specifically. Match the functional group to the molecular formula. I'm not going to ask you that kind of thing. Just understand that there's 7 important functional groups. The important number here is 7, and that by sticking these different functional groups onto carbon chains, it changes the chemistry and makes different, very important organic compounds. And in your book, you have a whole table that shows you what everything is. But I don't care that you tell me what that is for the exam. What I do want you to know is there is a molecule called ATP that's super duper important for cellular processes. If we do not have enough ATP in our body, if for some reason we have some sort of a mitochondrial issue where our body doesn't produce ATP, essentially we die. ATP, while food is the energy that gets us going, ATP is the energy that makes our cells do what they're supposed to do. And if our cells can't do what they do, then our muscles can't do what they do, our tissue systems can't do what they do, our organs can't, et cetera, et cetera. And so an organic phosphate molecule called ATP, adenose triphosphate, is probably the most important molecule within our body. We are going to see this further on, but I would get an idea of what it's made up of. It's made up of this group called an adenine, a ribose, and then 3 phosphate groups. There's another molecule called ADP that only has 2 phosphate groups, so one has been chopped off. And so ATP has the ability, there's so much energy stored inside this little tiny molecule, and as it breaks down, it releases gigantic amounts of energy that our cells use. I'm going to stop this section right here, and we're going to get into carbs, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids in a separate section or in a separate presentation.